It's so easy to build the technology now that it's not really the technology piece that is difficult. It's the actual go-to-market. It's the building a moat.
Richard Denton. He is the first official Replit integrator in the US and in Europe. He's private equity backed, and he's watched hundreds of ideas go from promising to production, to either winning or quietly dying. How would you get a Fortune 500 company to say yes to something that was built in less than 3 weeks?
Direct answer is they don't. Enterprises have tons of cash, but it can take 9 months to actually get access to that. Even $20,000, $30,000 isn't that easy to access.
Out of all the SaaS products you've seen so far, what do you think is the most impressive you've seen so far?
Is protected by having that patent. If you think about what the future looks like, chances are it's going to be agents talking with agents, potentially voice agents talking with other voice agents.
Would you say the future belongs more to the builders who can ship fast, or to the builders who can keep on improving even after everyone else has caught up? Everyone's building now. Replit, Cursor, Claude. All of these tools exist, and the barrier is now gone. Your 14-year-old cousin just shipped his third app this month. But here's the thing nobody's saying out loud. Most of it won't survive contact with a real user, a real enterprise, or even a real competitor who knows what they're doing. But my guest today has been building digital workforces since 2016, long before vibe coding was a word and people were calling themselves AI founders. He is the first official Replit integrator in the US and in Europe. He's private equity backed, and he's watched hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas go from promising to production, to either winning or quietly dying. Richard Denton doesn't just build fast, but he builds things that last inside companies that do not forgive mistakes. So if you've ever wondered what separates the founder who ships and scales from the one who ships and quietly disappears, this episode is for you. Richard, I'm so glad to have you on the podcast, and I really appreciate you being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. So, Richard, when a founder comes to you with an idea, what is an immediate signal or something that tells you that the founder has something real that can win versus just another product that sounds great on paper but has no chance of surviving in the real world?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we noticed that works really well is domain expertise. We talk a lot about domain expertise, domain knowledge. So where somebody has specific information, experience, and knowledge within a particular remit. So that might be lawyers, accountants, people in marketing, people in collections agencies, people who've run business in the past. And I think that's certainly the first area that we look is making sure that they are experts in their field. You might imagine like a doctor comes to you as a neurosurgeon, they're going to have so much inherent knowledge that actually, even when they come to me, there's no point in signing an NDA because they know it so well. So, and there's no way that can be copied. And I think that then extends out to other people trying to copy those ideas. So that's certainly one area. And then I think when it comes to just building an app, and trying to go to market with an app, there's the application or the product has to have a level of complexity that is hard to copy. It needs to have maybe a patent that is hard to copy, and obviously is protected by having that patent. Yeah, and I think those are the key things. And again, that kind of maybe some level of experience built within that specific product. I think some things can be just super simple as well. Like simplicity can also win. But we can talk about that a little bit later.
Sure. Yeah, for the audience and me as a 16-year-old, could you explain more of the domain of enterprise?
So typically when we're working with customers, I tend to put them into three brackets. I talk about startups. So we work with startups. Typically, a startup will come to us and say, we want to build something completely from scratch, whether that's their business or whether they just want to build an app or a product from scratch. We then have the mid market that I like to call, which really is anything from 50 million revenue to about $1 billion revenue. It's not really strictly defined. But the good thing about the mid market is that you get a lot of owner CEOs. So they tend to have a checkbook. They can actually just make a payment, they can make a decision straight away, and just decide, yes, I want to go with you guys, or no, I don't. Sometimes people just go with us. They seem to like us from day one. I don't fully know why. We jump on a call with them, and they seem to have a bit of trust in us from the get go. So that's great. And then things will move quickly. Then things will, we can just get into the code. We can review, and we can build quickly. And then there's enterprise. So enterprise, like to your question, is those bigger organizations where you have hundreds, thousands of people. There's pros and cons to that. There's there is money. There's lots of money to be had, but there's also a lot of people who don't necessarily have the ability to just sign that checkbook over straight away. So
Yeah.
there's a different approach depending on which organization you're working with. Personally, I like to just attack everyone and kind of try and work with everyone. But in order to do that, we'll build a different model that works a little bit differently for those different enterprises. Because you can imagine startups don't tend to have a lot of cash.
Yeah.
But it's easy to get to because it's someone, again, someone can make that decision tomorrow. Enterprises have tons of cash, but it can take 9 months to actually get access to that. Even $20,000, $30,000 isn't that easy to access in an enterprise.
So Richard, with Replit and all of these other AI coding tools lowering the barrier to building, are we actually ending up seeing more real founders, or just people who can ship things like very fast and really quick?
I definitely think we are seeing more founders. I think we're also seeing a lot of founders who maybe shouldn't be founders. I think, for want of a better expression, the advent of vibe coding has maybe released the crazy in people, and I think that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? So we are working with some people. I think they're building their next application. They believe they're going to be the next $1 billion company with like just a single person. They've never coded before in their life. They've never built a product before in their life. And whilst I admire that kind of enthusiasm, and I believe that it's not a million miles away from the truth, I think you also have to be realistic and understand that building a product is not that hard. And I think, as you said, it's so easy to build the technology now that it's not really the technology piece that is difficult. It's the actual go to market. It's the building a moat. I think we're going to talk about that in a bit, but it's you've got to remember that lots and lots of other people are now having these same ideas. I think it's arrogant to think that other people are not trying to do what you're doing. I think you just have to do it faster. You have to do it better. And you have to, again, use that experience or use that niche area that you have, or that niche experience that you have to stay competitive.
So Richard, how exactly would you define a founder in this time? Like, what are some characteristics that they would have?
Well, anyone who's entrepreneurial is a founder. I think when you look online, you'll see that there are tons of founders now. Almost everyone seems to be a CEO, CTO, founder, and if they're not, they're working for a enterprise business, but they've got something else on the side. A lot of people will be building things in their spare time, and I think that's one really big thing that's come from the advent of vibe coding, is that people are now able to build in their spare time. They're able to dabble, maybe build that product that they always wanted to build and haven't been able to, or maybe it's something that, again, augments what they do in their day job. Maybe they're a product manager in their day job and they're able to now go and build something in their spare time that may become a product. So, I don't think it really matters what the definition of a founder is. I think the most important thing is that you have an idea and that you believe in it. That I will say the most successful things, kind of going back to your first question, the most successful things I've seen are typically where someone is really passionate about it. It's something that you love and it's something that you're good at. And we actually recently were involved in the Race to Revenue, a mentor scheme as part of Replit. There were 20 people who came across, and whilst their ideas sort of varied between okay to really good, the one thing that really tied them together was that they clearly believed in what they were doing. They were invested. They invested their time. They invested their own money, and they truly believed in what they were doing. And I think that actually sets them apart more so necessarily than having a brilliant idea. And everybody knows that just because a product is a brilliant product doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be successful. Vice versa.
So Richard, you've seen like thousands of vibe coded apps that went into production and then like failed spectacularly. So what exactly is the pattern you see in those specific products?
So what we see in terms of the challenges are really around the way the code is structured, and
Okay.
we've also seen the vibe coding. I don't even like the term vibe coding necessarily because it kind of sounds a bit gimmicky. AI assisted coding has evolved even over the last year. So about a year or so ago, we were speaking with our developers and we said, from your experience, how good is this code? And they were like, it was okay, but I had to really go in. I had to like completely re-engineer the whole thing, and really, it probably would have been just as quick to build this from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
We asked that same question a year later, and yeah, our developer said, yeah, I just one prompted this application, and I didn't need to change anything. So it was a small piece.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the fully more scalable applications,
There's
it
still some
is
modifications that need to be done.
100%, yeah. We need to modify. At the moment, I wouldn't necessarily recommend, you know, going to scale within one of the vibe coding tools. Typically we're saying if it's got a scale, we're going to move it to AWS, Azure. But you can do 95% of the work within a Replit, within a Lovable,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
etc. And you can continue iterating within that. So as long as you set up your pipeline, you can deploy onto those more structured environments. But in terms of answering your question, the big challenges come around scalability. So is it modular enough? Sometimes the vibe coding tools tend to build databases in a very monolithic way. So a handful of tables or way too many columns within that database
Okay.
table. So more often than not, we're going in, we're breaking down code, we're breaking down the database structure, and making it much more modular, much more kind of like microservices, able to scale up instead.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, Richard, you've worked with like huge companies and even early stage founders. So, honestly, who would you say is harder to work with and why?
I would generally say the enterprises.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just a quick one on the non-enterprise customers. The only thing that can be challenging there is they see a tool like Replit
Mm-hmm.
and they get very, very excited and realize that you can do a lot of stuff. And whilst you can, to really, as we like the thing, the final 5-10% that we just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
that actually can take just as long as the initial 80-90%. I'm sorry, I wasn't very good math, was it? But you understand what I'm saying. We
Yeah.
typically
Yeah.
talk about the first 80%, and then the final 20%.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find interesting is that not everyone's 80% is equal. So some people will think they're at 80%, and actually from our perspective they're more like 10-20%. Everything's fake data and so on. And then, like I say, the most difficult bit is that last 20%. So that what I was saying is that from a startup perspective, sometimes people think that this is super easy.
Mm-hmm.
So when we tell them it's going to take 2 weeks, a month to really shore up the application, they sort of question
They're like, why?
that.
Yeah.
But having said that, so on the enterprise level, the challenge, as always, is not around the technology. It's just around people, process, change, governance, and things like that. And
Okay.
understandably so. If we're working with a bank or we're working with a big telco business, then they're not going to just say, oh yeah, we're going to build this app in 2 days and we're going to
Mhm.
push it live to thousands of customers. It's just not going to happen.
They need double check
So
safety. There's a lot of things that need to go into it.
exactly,
Yeah.
So we need to work with their IT department. We need to work with their, so I've spent a lot of time working with business users
Mm-hmm.
who see the value in these types of tools. All of the automation tools I work with, we typically would be selling to business users. We'd be selling to CFOs. We'd be heads of department, and again, specialists in their particular areas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they see the value, but then you have to also get IT on board as well. So IT needs to be not necessarily super supportive, but they need to be in the loop, if nothing else, and they need to trust that there's a good process to go from, okay, I've built this prototype, this MVP. It needs to be reviewed, it needs to be secured, it needs to be pushed into a certain way. So it's exactly the same principle as what I was talking about, but everything is just done at a more secure level. So it's still got that 80-20. The business can build their solutions to their business problems in no time, but actually getting it over the line, that 20%, is probably harder in enterprise than it is even with
Mm-hmm.
startups.
So out of all the enterprises you really work with, like what would you say is the hardest industry?
Um, in terms of industry, I think probably anything financial.
Okay.
Um, so when working with financial companies, obviously you have sensitive data
Mm-hmm.
from a company perspective, and then the second or probably the most sensitive is healthcare. So with anything healthcare, you have to be HIPAA compliant. You have to make sure that your data is protected, that it's stored in the right area,
Mm-hmm.
that it's encrypted at rest and in transit. So you know, I'd say those are the main two areas where we see you know questions around. Okay, so like is Replit, for example, SOC 2 certified? Yes, they are. Okay, great. That's a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
What's really intriguing though about this new wave is that a tool like Replit, a tool like Lovable Base 44, can be SOC 2 certified. They could be ISO certified, which is great because if the data, if everything you're doing is within that environment, then it's protected and it's secure.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, you've then got users building applications on top of those systems. So it's almost like saying, well, AWS, of course, they're SOC 2 certified, right? But just because AWS is certified doesn't necessarily mean that everything you do and build is of an equal kind of level of SOC and ISO standards, which isn't necessarily something that people have addressed that much yet. I wouldn't say. From if you imagine a startup, right? They're building an application, they build it on Replit, so they can go live with it if they want. But if they want to sell that into an enterprise, they would have to go through those certifications with a company like Vanta to make sure that all the code that they've built and all the processes that are like from within their organization are actually compliant with those kind of high standards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So, Richard, I think enterprises are slow and Replit is a lot more faster than that. So, how would you get a Fortune 500 company to say yes to something that was built in less than 3 weeks?
Mm. I think the direct answer is they don't.
Okay.
They say yes to, and this kind of goes back to my last point, right? They say yes to working with Replit and using it for prototyping and for
Mm-hmm.
MVPs. I think when it comes to internal projects and internal productivity, they are they're more than happy to work with that. And then a little bit then depends on who's owning the piece. So kind of going back to one of your earlier questions about how we work differently with different levels.
Mm-hmm.
As a third party, we tend to work more on the support side with enterprises. We'll do advisory and we'll do support. We'll do less of the actual building ourselves. There will be some projects that they say, yeah, actually, this is a little bit more complicated. We want you guys to come in and help.
Mm-hmm.
But because the vibe coding is reasonably simple, they can certainly get a long way on their own, and they like to do that. So they'll build out the applications themselves, and then they'll rely on us to push them through to the next level. So
Okay.
so what that means from our perspective is that really the responsibility and the decision about how and when to go live is with the customer. So they say, well, these people are internal. They have the knowledge about the systems. They've already got access to all of those
Mm-hmm.
systems and so on. So we now just need a procedure in place to take those MVPs or those products into production. Whether that would happen in 3 weeks is pretty unlikely. Again, just because IT is then likely to have to be involved to
Yeah.
push them. Having said that, if it is more of a productivity tool, then chances are they will have that up and running. If it's just something that's going to help them with their calendar
Mm-hmm.
or
It's a lot more faster. They can send it out and push it out.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So if there's less sensitive data, then they for sure are more likely to get that
Mm-hmm.
up and running.
So, Richard, the mode has definitely changed, and so I want you to like tell me what you think about it now. Like, is it still about tech, or is it more about trust, speed, and being close to the customer?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not the tech anymore. I think the ability to build super complex things like voice agents, like RAG models, like small language models, working with maps, and all those things that used to be really difficult. And if you look at a SaaS product now, I don't know if you've done this, and you look at it and you think, wow, that is not that impressive. Whereas even 2 years ago, any SaaS product, any kind of software that you saw was much more impressive because it all had to be hand coded. And now we're at a point where I'm looking at these products and thinking, well, if I built that myself, I would build it in a slightly different way.
Or like I can build that at
So
home or something like that.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, and and I think that then obviously means that the building can't be the moat, other than building really fast and like I said right at the start. I think building a level of complexity into that application is huge. So again, take our neurosurgeon. They have this knowledge and this experience that they can build into an application that can then become something that is very, very difficult for someone else to follow. I've worked with lawyers who are like the top 5 lawyers in the world, and they just have this knowledge that you can't replicate. Yes, you can try and use ChatGPT, but you don't know if ChatGPT is telling you the right answer really, and even then, it still doesn't give you the level of depth that a true lawyer with all of that knowledge and experience would give you.
Hmm.
So that's definitely one moat. The other is go to market. I think I always like to say money makes money. So if you have money behind you, you can spend money on ads. You can spend money on the new LLM SEOs. You can spend money on just general marketing. You can pay for salespeople. So without having cash to fund you now, it's going to be harder and harder to really get off the ground.
Hmm.
But I think there's always in these situations pros and cons, right? So 2 years ago, my neurosurgeon and lawyer friend, they wouldn't have even thought about building an application. So now all of a sudden, people who never would have thought about building technology or using software are doing it, and they're adding that to their portfolio. They're either saying, "Wow, I'm going to put all of my money and all of my time and energy into a go-to-market app," or I'm going to just build this kind of companion app. And I will say that the majority of people we're working with we're seeing be successful are building more companion apps. Things that work with their product.
Hmm. Richard, out of all the SaaS products you've seen so far, like a product, app, service, what do you think is the most impressive you've seen so far?
Um, I've got. I think I've been super impressed with the voice agents, and I think when they're done well, they are kind of mind blowing. So I've got one colleague that I've been working with. He's been building some really really crazy agents, and then building test agents. I think if you think about what the future looks like, chances are it's going to be agents talking with agents, potentially voice agents talking with other voice agents. In his examples, he has an agent dialing up a car maintenance garage, for example, maybe a Porsche dealer or something, and it's an agent and it talks to another agent, and the other agent takes all of its details, asks all the key questions, schedules the booking, and yeah, it's the I think again when you're thinking about what the future looks like, it's going to be technology talking with technology, but then who's going to own that? Who's going to orchestrate that? And who's gonna manage it and make sure that things aren't going wrong?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I think there's a few products that are being released as well. Like when it comes to voice agents, I think like Whisper Flow, it dictates voice to text, which is really
Mhm.
cool. Like I've
Yeah.
seen a bunch of ads on it. It's been like growing in popularity like, really fast. So I think yeah, you're right. When it comes to voice agents, it's going to be like the next big thing as well. I feel like not like huge, but it's getting like pretty popular and it's growing insanely fast.
Yeah, and I think another thing I've thought recently is that there's a bit of a crossover happening between the more of the physical kind of AI, like robots,
Mhm.
humanoids,
Yeah.
and the like, and then because now the software is easier to build, I think is a much easier path to go from building to building some software that could actually then control and manage a humanoid or a physical
Mhm.
robot. And that's something that you wouldn't have even thought of in the past. And in my head, certainly, I always kind of separated out the software from the robot. Of course, they were always interconnected,
Mhm.
but the thought of me trying to build something that would control a robot was just like, no, it's not even possible. I was excited enough just to be able to build an application that had externally facing APIs. When I first discovered Replit.
Richard, if you were to go back and be 19 right now with Replit and all of these tools out there, what exactly are you going to build? And what would you do differently than the founders that are coming to you today?
That's a great question. I honestly don't know what I would build. I think certainly my advice would be, I think when you're that age, you don't have the pressures and the challenges of life, right? You haven't bought into corporate America at that point. So, you might be on a 200,000, 300,000 salary in corporate America. And it's very, very difficult to leave that and sort of follow your dream.
Hmm.
I think what is super exciting about this day and age is that, I put a post out the other day saying the only limitation is your imagination now. Like what drives you, what excites you, and what are you good at as well. And if
Hmm.
you can put those two things together, then I think you can go away and think about a business that you can start, whether that's a physical business with a companion app, or if that's just I really really want to build software and I want to get into the software industry. Think about something really basic, like I want to start a laundry company, that I'm just going to go around and maybe it's like an Uber for laundry. Cool. And then you can obviously, it's much easier now to build an application that would go with that. Alternatively, you want to just build that as a pure software product where people can just like Airbnb, where you're it's completely online, it's completely managed via an app. So
Hmm.
not that anyone's that excited about laundry, I don't think, but yeah, like funny enough, the reason I got into golf originally, and going back to your question, I think I know what I would build. I'd build an app related to golf, and we do actually have one on that we're working on. It's currently in test flight on the App Store, um, and that's just an application that is based around golf. And again, it's because I love playing golf, and I was practicing at the driving range, and I thought, oh, I really need to. I wish I could have this thing. I wish I could have a golf coach in my pocket, effectively. And when I went home, went onto Replit and built it. And actually, that was the reason I got into Replit in the first place. I was on a plane back from San Francisco, and for some reason, I got in my head that I wanted to build this app, and I didn't know how to build an MVP. I thought it was going to cost me $20,000 and take 6 weeks, with people I didn't know. And it turns out, no, I could build this in a weekend, and I had the prototype up and running in a weekend.
Yeah, it's insane
So
what you can do nowadays. It's crazy.
yeah, and there's a lot of people who will tell us that they've had such a bad experience with software development companies in the past, and that's
Mm.
that's another thing that's changing now is that dynamic of being able to work with people who are maybe less, focused on the software development, less kind of, of that sort of personality where it's just, give me this piece of work and I'll do it, but I'm not going to try and impress you. I'm not going to blow your mind with, the technology that we've got.
Hmm.
To people who are really creative and can actually collaborate with customers and build things that just makes them really happy. And it's a bit of a cliche, delighting customers. But when we work with our customers, they come back and they say, "Wow, I'm shocked." And then I'll tell them about a new feature that's come out in Replit, like the slides or the animations, and they say, "Wow, this is just fantastic."
Hmm. They're always blown away. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So, Richard, for the last question of our convo, would you say the future belongs more to the builders who can ship fast, or to the builders who can keep on improving even after everyone else has caught up?
I honestly think it's both now. I just don't. I think you just have to be the best in every aspect of what you're doing. But I also don't want this to sound like unhopeful. It's just because everyone now has access to these things. What we're noticing is that some people have really taken to this, like myself, like my co-founder. We love this because we can be creative all of a sudden. But sometimes I go and talk to someone and they say, well, yeah, but I don't have any ideas. I don't know what to build with this technology. And to me, that's just mind blowing. The fact that they have this toolkit that you could literally build anything. It's like being a house builder, right? If you've got all the tools there, you can go and build it. One person's going to say, this is amazing, I can literally build whatever house I want. I'm saying I still don't really want to do that. It's too much effort. It's not really my skill set or my bag. So I think it's exactly the same with this software now, that maybe different people are going to run with this stuff. But in terms of, that's not to say there isn't a lot of competition out there. I think if you're online, it does feel like a bit of an echo chamber. Everyone's building the latest and greatest app. But I think there's still a lot of room for different ideas. There's room for differentiation. I think what we're going to see is that niche products become more and more relevant. So Whereas in the old days, it was QuickBooks, right? It's QuickBooks for accounting. Well, why not? Why isn't there just an accounting app that is specifically for construction?
Mm-hmm.
Why not an accounting app that is specifically for construction in Dallas or in Texas? And then that just means that either that gets built as a go-to-market product, as a SaaS product, or the company themselves builds it, and they just say, well, I can build this now so easily myself. Why wouldn't I? But
Mm-hmm.
again, not everyone is or wants to be a software developer. Some people will see this technology and they'll say, yeah, that's great. Now I know what's possible. Off you go. You go and build this for me now. But don't charge me $600,000. Charge me $50,000 instead, because it's so much faster. And then other people, of course, will say, oh yeah, I really want to hire somebody. I was talking with a recruiter the other day, and we're looking at maybe building a recruitment arm to the business and saying, well, we know this wave is coming. People are some like enterprises, for example, are going to want to hire these types of people, which isn't necessarily the same people that were building SAP or supporting SAP even 2-3 years ago. It's a very different skill set. So it's going to be really interesting in the future to see who really adapts this and adopts this, and who actually kind of maybe gets pushed to the wayside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate this. This was a really insightful conversation.
No problem at all. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And so for everyone listening, if this hit, I want you to take away one thing from this convo. The tools being equal doesn't make the founders equal. Speed gets you to the starting line, but what happens after that is a completely different game. Richard's work is at AskRoute, and if you're building something and you want to actually survive in the enterprise world, that's your first call. And if you're also a young founder watching this, thinking you're already ahead because you can ship fast, good. But stay hungry and go back and listen to what Richard said about the moats, because that part will save you months of pain. I'm Rayyan Ali. This is the Gen Z EO Playbook Podcast. Make sure to share this with a friend who needs to see it, and I'll see you in the next episode.